Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Top Cyber Pro podcast. I'm the founder and CEO of TopCyberPro.com, Jim West. And look at it, we're already kind of halfway through season four, and we've been trucking along with several great guests. And as usual, we got another great guest over here on the other side of the screen for me. This man is he's a keynote speaker. He's a level 99 expert. He's got he's an author. I mean, he's a podcaster as well. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, and I'll have the link to his podcast below as well, so you can check it out. Again, this guy's got a lot of hats he wears, and just like any other level 99 expert in the industry, he's got a lot of different things. He's got a lot of coals and several different fires. So without further ado, I have Justin Hutchens. So Justin, welcome to the Top Cyber Pro podcast.
Hey Jim, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So can you just let anyone watching, a little bit about what you do, like there's the day job, but like what do you do in a broader sense of the work and the focus that you have in cybersecurity?
Sure. So I got started in my career doing penetration testing in the Air Force. Moved into the private sector, did that for about a decade. And one of the things that I always really enjoyed in penetration testing was the building new tools, coding, developing. So I ultimately ended up moving into research and development with a focus on cybersecurity. And then finally, in my most recent role, I am an innovation principal, which essentially means that I'm just looking at early stage funded companies, usually enterprise technology solutions. 99% of that these days is AI-based solutions. So I spend a lot of my time in artificial intelligence, and actually was playing in artificial intelligence for nearly a decade prior to. Had a personal interest in algorithmic trading, and so I've built a lot of different trading systems with early machine learning models, all the way up to various different adversarial techniques and misuse of AI technology. So it's been quite a journey.
Wonderful. That's a lot right there, right? Um, it's funny how no matter how many films James Cameron puts out in the Terminator franchise, we just seem to be just run into AI full speed. And I mean that as a joke, of course, because AI, I believe, with any type of emerging, innovative, disruptive type technology, there's going to be great things that come out of it. Yes, there's going to be some good and the bad. But as long as we keep focused, as long as we get certain things right, like kind of like the ethics, the laws, the principles, the guide rails, if you will, to developing building these systems. I know there's still a lot of debate and discussion in that arena because people are just kind of like the Wild West, all willy-nilly with wherever the directions they're taking their AI systems and then stealing data sovereignty. There's a lot of other discussions around this technology, but we're not going to get into those rabbit holes in this discussion. We're going to really focus about, a little bit about the bad things from the hacking perspective, with your experiences and expertise in pen testing. But before we get to that though, we hear a lot of folks talking about, you hear the common things. When people say, "Oh, how do I get into cyber?" They'll be like, "Oh, go to Try Hack Me or Hack the Box," and those two sites get brought up all the time, right? And even though I think those sites have value for a lot of folks just to kind of learn some basics, but at the end of the day, I think I like to use the term all in. Like if you make the decision to commit to something like a career or like a body of knowledge. I'm just, how do you feel about, and I'm going to make the statement and you could disagree or agree or give a different answer. But to me, I think that, if you dabbled with Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, and it's just either you're not going to pay for it and get the super high speed VMs with it, that at some point, if you really want to go all in, load VirtualBox or have a throwaway Chromebook that you could throw a Linux Unix build on it, and then just put Kali Linux and just go through YouTube videos and start learning, from examples. But what is your perception as far as someone that hears about pen testing and hacking? Like, where do I get started? What is your thoughts on that, Hutch?
I think self-learning is huge in this industry. I do think that you have to be passionate about learning. You do have to be a person that is committed to learning throughout your entire career. I think that we had this period in time a couple decades back, kind of our parents' generation,
Yeah.
where you would learn a specific trade or profession early on in your life, and you would continue to do that all the way through. And I think that increasingly that's no longer the case. Things are changing more and more day over day, year over year. And because of that, it is absolutely crucial that anybody, regardless of what field you're in, has to be able to adapt and you have to constantly be learning. But I think that nowhere is that more true than in technology and in penetration testing. You have to be constantly up to date with what are the latest vulnerabilities, what are the latest attack techniques, because the infrastructure is constantly changing. Things are getting patched, things are getting updated as new operating systems are introduced and older ones are sunset. Vulnerabilities that used to be a guaranteed win in almost every single network tend to go away over time. And so it is. I think that there's a ton of value in doing, as you said, kind of just building your own environment, playing around, learning from wherever you can in the community, whether that's courses, whether that's YouTube videos. I think that one thing that's really exciting about the modern age with being in hacking or penetration testing is that when I got started, you essentially had to set up a physical lab in your home and you had to purchase multiple different machines. And now, with the increased availability of virtualization of cloud environments, you can essentially get a free tier environment on something like AWS or Azure for a year, a bunch of micro instances, and deploy whatever you want, whether that's damn vulnerable web app or various different vulnerable services. And you really don't even have to subscribe to anything. You can just play around with that and do self-learning. And I think that that is absolutely critical for anybody that wants to get into the industry.
So I've had a few colleagues of mine that are into pen testing and auditing and systems auditing as well. And what I've been hearing lately from some of them, they're talking about how, let's say they kind of, I'm trying to use the right word. They kind of reach something where they're looking for something new. They want to take bigger challenges. They want to fill in the director roles, the more senior management level roles, but they kind of get stuck in being like, well, no, you're the tech guy, you're the pen test guy, you're the hacker guy. They get the kind of like typecasted, if you will. And you know what? I don't think a lot of, and if there's any managers watching this video right now, you got to think in terms of the right person you want in those leadership roles are the ones that they think outside, inside, and all around the box kind of thinking. And that's what a pen tester hacker mindset does. If you got a challenge or problem, they're going to dissect it and figure out root cause it. They're the best analysts, you know, when you think about it. So if you're going to want to promote someone up into your executive chain, look at your pen testers and your auditors of your network. Give them a shot. Because I tell you what, getting like a project management professional cert or picking up a degree is an easy thing for a pen tester to do. If that's their ticket to entry, have that discussion. I think that, you know, when people talk about, you know, the opportunities for, you know, with all these expert systems that do a lot of CM monitoring and proactive measures, a lot of folks think that, oh, that might be, you know, killing the pen tester community. But I still think there's value in even adjacent careers. You know, we could talk about threat intelligence. We could talk about incident response. We could talk about event management and other adjacent fields that a pen tester can lateral through all those roles seamlessly. But what I think people need to remember that is if you're a pen tester and you're really good at doing it, that means you can solve problems, you can figure out systems. And those systems are whether they're computer based, corporate based, management based. I think that that's a skill set that's lacking in a lot of executive teams. What are your thoughts with that statement I just made there, Hutch?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think one person that immediately comes to mind with the way that you're describing that is a guy named Ted Harrington. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's
Yep.
the founder of IoT Village, and the mantra that he is constantly pushing forward is this idea of think like a hacker.
Think like a hacker. Yep.
And it's a it hacking goes far beyond just kind of understanding the technical nuance of systems. It really is a mentality and a mindset. It is being persistent. It is being resourceful. There are so many things that go into the way that we perform hacking that is broadly useful across life, is kind of a life
Yes.
hacking tool. So I think there is that component of it where you can, if you are a pen tester or a hacker and you want to move on to the next thing, I think that maybe not all of the technical skills or the specific tools that you know how to use are going to be relevant, but the
Hmm.
mindset is valuable.
Yep.
And then the one other thing that I think is extremely useful is the fact that you get an unbelievable amount of exposure to different technologies. So while it's easy for somebody on the outside to look at penetration testing and say, oh, they just use Nmap and Metasploit, well, the truth is the stuff that we're attacking, you have to have an understanding and you have to do research to understand how it operates in order to be able to effectively exploit it. And so you get knowledge of not just the hacker tools, but you also get knowledge of the security operations processes in order to be able to evade them. You get an understanding of all different types of technology platforms and see how they're deployed and good ways that they're deployed and bad ways that they're deployed. So I think that there's the value in the mindset of think like a hacker, but there's also the value in the tremendous amount of exposure that you get. And I think that you can use both of those in order to pivot to more senior roles that have broader exposure to either security or even more broadly in enterprise technology.
Love that. And I'm glad that you mentioned Ted Harrington. So he was in season 3 of the Top Cyber Pro podcast, and I'll have the link to the Ted's episode in the description below. But I love that you brought up Ted. Wonderful guy. If we was to go in a time machine and go back to your day one, I know you mentioned, you was in uniform at the Air Force, but your day one when you made a decision that, hey, IT cyber, this is the path I want to take for my career. Is there a story around that day one that you could share with us?
There is. So actually, I joined the Air Force as what was called client systems. So it was effectively help desk for the
Okay.
United States. And I did not expect that I was going to end up in cybersecurity. But shortly after I went through basic training and tech school, I happened to get placed in a group of cubicles that was, of course, all of the IT help desk people, but it was directly next to the cyber ops group that was all civilians.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I had always been really passionate about, as I mentioned, I enjoyed coding and building tools. Even back then, very early in my career, I was very interested in coding. It was right after Microsoft had just released their PowerShell capability.
Okay.
And that was something that I was digging into heavily at the time. And I remember that at the time, one of the grumblings that we heard from the security ops team is they were using EI Retina, which may still be around. I don't think anybody uses it anymore, but it was a very early vulnerability scanner.
Hmm.
And it struggled a lot with asset discovery. And so I ended up going over there and showing them how they could take a discovery tool that they had created to sequentially go out and discover assets and use PowerShell in order to multi-thread that and rapidly perform discovery across the entire joint base. And so what quickly became of that is as they had wanted to add new features or if they needed to support it, they were pulling me over from my group over to help them out. And it wasn't within more than a couple months. I had kind of become the honorary only military guy in that group. And got a permanent seat there and actually never even recoded. So my 5 years in the Air Force, I did stay consistent. I was always coded as a client systems guy, but performed security work and started. It was also around the time that they were building out the first offensive cyber capability. And so I got to work very closely with some of the teams that were building that out. So got to really play around with some of the not just the vulnerability management, but the penetration testing tools and solutions that were out there. It was also during that time that I took the offensive security pen testing with Backtrack. So this was before
Oh,
Kali
okay.
Linux was out.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so got my OSCP back then, was one of the early OSCPs. So yeah, it was a very unusual, different journey. Certainly not the path that I expected, but once I started digging in, once I started really getting into security, I was hooked. It wasn't just a job; it was something that I was absolutely passionate
Yeah.
about.
And you was all in at that moment, right? So just to give a little bit of context for those that may not be familiar with some of the acronyms he's just dropped. I'm gonna start with the most recent one, OSCP, Offensive Security. I'm gonna tell you, I can't speak more highly of this organization as well as their certifications and their training. Offensive Security, if you haven't heard about Offensive Security, folks, they're pretty much, well, they're they're to me they're the top of the mountain when it comes to certifications in pen testing, and they cover a lot of certs that cover different facets of pen testing as well, like for wireless, for web applications. So they have a good body, several bodies of knowledge that are very focused. The thing about the OCP, it's kind of like if you want a certification, right? If you walk into say like the Super Bowl of hacking and just hacking and cracking is DEF CON, right? If you walk into a DEF CON event and you're like, oh, I got my CEH, that's worthless in the real community, right? When you talk about what's worth something in the streets, I'm sorry to EC Council, but CEH, as far as an event like DEF CON, doesn't carry a lot of street cred, right? I have the G pin from GAIAC from Sands, and that doesn't hold any water on the streets. But OSCP, it holds water, and it's for one reason why. I'm going to tell you guys why these certs have respect, reputation, and value is because their exams are 100% labs. You can't just, the dirty side of the certification industry is test dumps. It's the worst thing in the world because you could have someone on your team that test dumped his way to get the cert to get in the seat next to you, but he is not worth his weight in salt. But if you got a guy like Hutch sitting next to you who's got OSCP, he's worth his weight in salt. He had to do a lab and perform in that lab to pass and acquire that credential. So that's some real street level credentials. So I'm a huge fan of offensive security, Hutch. So if you didn't know that, something about me, you know now. And then he talked about vulnerability management, working from like the IT support desk, service desk, and then working with cyber ops and using PowerShell. And then of course he was talking about Retina. Retina was an old, not a, it was probably an 80% solution. A lot of solutions we find are 80% solutions. And of course nowadays they have a thing called Tenable ACAS that the DoD uses, and they are better solutions than that. That's an okay solution. But the concept that what Hutch was talking about is like what he was doing that PowerShell script to help them with discovery. Discovery is how you identify what's in your IP ranges, what's on your network. If you don't, and there's an old adage about if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it, you can't secure it. So your vulnerability management tool, if you can't do a discovery properly or get near 100%, then you can't scan what's on your network to know what needs to be patched, what needs to be remediated. So it's a very important, never ending process, right? Think of it as like the mail, the post office. The mail is always coming in, new exploits are coming in. We got to patch a scan for these. It's a never ending process. So even though he got his teeth cut into working with the teams that were doing that on a day-to-day basis, it brings me to this question, Hutch, and I've heard this from a couple of colleagues as well, transition out the military into the commercial world. And one of the things I hear that I don't hear a lot, but I do hear from a few, and I want to know if you've ever experienced this, but there's some sectors of commercial space, you got some people that I'll just call them haters. And these haters want to say, oh, you didn't do real security. That's just DOD or Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. Doesn't matter what component of DOD. But they're like, oh, that's not real security. What we do here is real security. Have you come across that in your career out the uniform?
I have, and I think that some of the thought process behind that is the I, I would say, I guess, financial investment. I think we often hear the term military grade, and some people think kind of the cutting edge. Other people see kind of the hand-me-down technology stuff that some of the Army guys and
That's at the
other
lowest
people.
price.
Yeah, but I think the other thing is that there is the truth is that it is um I think there was a period where at least regulated industries on the private sector probably did invest a lot more in cybersecurity than the military. I think we are seeing that shift and have been seeing that shift for the past
Yeah.
decade or so. So I think that that may come from people that, of course, were in there. And I think there also is a trend in any government space where there are people that are happy being a cog in the wheel and they see it as a safe place to stay and they coast. There are others that are very passionate about what they do and they really set the bar higher. So I think it's probably draws from personal experiences that people have had. I have heard it before. I don't think that it's I think that in some cases it's probably true, in others it absolutely isn't.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, speaking of setting the bar higher, this gentleman right here doesn't just have his demanding day job, if you will, but he finds the time to do a lot of other things. And so one of the things I want to talk about is your podcast. So you have the Cyber Cognition podcast. Now you co-host this with another person, right?
I do. So my co-host is Lynn No. He is a leader in the transhumanism space. So he's one of the First, very dedicated, augmented technical hackers. So he's got, I think now he has 11 different implants across different areas of his arm that allow
Okay.
him to interface with all types of different technology and protocols.
Okay.
And he authored a number of different attacks that allow him to do everything from kind of tracing uh, the magnetic fields of wiring for physical doors all the way to if he holds your phone or asks somebody to use their phone because of some simulated emergency that he has, he can implant malware using the NFC that is connected from his hand
Yeah.
into the back. So all kinds of crazy stuff. The podcast is focused very much on kind of cutting edge technology and how that is impacting our society, both from a risk perspective as well as just kind of the way that we socially interact and how that's changing on a day-to-day basis. And so I come at that very much from a long interest in artificial intelligence. Lynn comes at it from a slightly different angle of that transhumanism perspective. I think both of us are somewhat on the cutting edge of where technology is going, and so it's some great conversations. We change it up as far as what topics we discuss. We sometimes have various different guests on there that can speak to different areas that maybe we're not as knowledgeable about, and so it's a
No.
fun show.
Well, for those that, if you're thinking, let me pause this video and hit Google real quick. Google it. I'm gonna save you the Google search. The link to the podcast is gonna be in the description below. 2 clicks away, and you're there. You can check it out. It definitely sounds interesting with the multiple implants. I think that's just wild, when we think of things. But we're on the cusp of it. Elon's got Neuralink, right? And where that may go is just, again taking us to another level, bridging our thoughts into reality, right? So I think that that's cool. You also have a book, so I definitely want to talk about this. You're gonna have to give me the full title, but it starts with the language of deception, and then the rest is
Weaponizing next generation AI.
weaponized nation. Okay, so could you talk a little bit about what the book is about and the why of the book?
So I guess I'll start with the background story of why I decided to write the book in the first place. I was doing a lot of research into, well, actually, it goes back almost about a decade at this point. So I think it was 2017, I did a presentation at TorCon, and it looked at using artificial intelligence for social manipulation tactics. So at the
Mhm.
time in 2017, multi-factor authentication was not nearly as pervasive as it is
Yeah,
now. And so for anybody that's listening that isn't familiar, multi-factor authentication, of course, you get the code on your phone that you type in as well as your username and password in order to authenticate. That wasn't on everything the way that it is
today,
nowadays.
yeah.
And a lot of times, in order to gain access to someone's account, all you needed was answers to their common recovery questions. What
Mhm.
was their pet's name growing up? What was the street they grew up on? What was their high school mascot? Mother's maiden name? All of those types of things. And so I came up with this idea of, well, social engineering, in my experience with penetration testing, it is one of the most effective tactics. The weakest link in the chain is always the human that is attached to the system. The problem with social engineering is that it's not nearly as scalable as other attacks. So, with most attacks, you can automate the attack, you can send hundreds or thousands of different payloads in order to try to gain access. But with social engineering, you have to take the time to establish rapport and then be able to exploit that trust. And so I had this idea of what if I could use artificial intelligence to automate conversational intelligence and talk back and forth with victims. And I also thought about where I would potentially raise the least red flags by trying to harvest the answers to recovery questions. And so, of course, if Jim, if I walk up to you randomly on the street and I ask you what's your mother's maiden name or your first pet's name, it's probably going to raise red flags.
Of course.
But there is one context where that's not the case, and that is when the entire point of the conversation is to get to know each other. And of course, that's nowhere is that more true than in the dating context. So what I did was I built social engineering bots, of course, on terrible AI technology by today's standards, but it was the best that was available then. But I built these conversational bots and I actually deployed them to autonomously interact with people on free dating sites at the time
Mhm.
and would engage in a conversation with them and then would attempt to ask those various different recovery questions and harvest the answers to them. And what I found is even with the very bad conversational AI that existed at the time, it still worked about 2 to 3% of the time. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have an automated system that's interacting with thousands of people completely hands off, 2 to 3% is still potentially tens, if not hundreds, of potential points of access every single
Yeah.
day. And so I kind of tabled it at the time. It was a fun hobby project, but I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. So as I mentioned, I was involved a lot with AI from the algorithmic trading side. So I was already very interested in OpenAI's reinforcement learning technology
Mhm.
early on, which is where they and so I caught wind pretty early on of what they were doing with their early GPT models. And so once I interacted with GPT-3, the Da Vinci model, which was the predecessor to ChatGPT, I immediately knew that we had achieved something unbelievable in terms of conversational intelligence. And so I started building adversarial systems around it, specifically autonomous social engineering systems, not just focused on kind of that
Mhm.
harvesting of recovery, but all kinds of different pretexts that I could give it in order to try to manipulate people and get information out of them. And building these systems was a little bit different back then just because of the way that the GPT systems were architected. But so I was having a lot of fun with that. I actually did talks at multiple different places. I actually spoke at DEF CON's AI Village about 3 months before the release of
Nice.
ChatGPT about the risk of open AI technology. And of course, I never expected it to take off the way that it did. But then, of course, once ChatGPT released and the unbelievable amount of interest that went into that, I knew that if there was this much awareness around the technology, what I thought was going to be a problematic source of attack was just going to explode. And sure enough, I was right on that. But I figured if there was ever a time to write a book where the topic that I had already been researching was suddenly of extreme relevance, that was the time to do it. So I buckled down, basically set myself a budget of every single day I was going to write at least 900 words. So the equivalent of like a short college essay every single day for about 6 months just to get it out the door as fast as I could. And the end result was the book, which looks at various different ways that uh, frontier, increasingly powerful artificial intelligence systems can be weaponized for everything from social engineering to autonomous hacking systems that actually use that intelligence to perform end-to-end exploitation.
No, there's Mo Godot, a former Google exec, has been on. He's been a very vocal person about AI, and somewhat talk a little bit about quantum computing, but more so AI has been his main caution to a lot of folks. And he's been quoted, I think, as that the current versions of ChatGPT is approaching. I think he's quoted at 155 IQ. Now, I know a lot of people are going to drum up, well, which IQ tests are you using? Because there's several different ones. And can you really apply a intelligence quotient to an AI? There's a lot of that debate. But for someone like Mo to come out and make a statement like that, let's just take it on face value that if it is at a 155, no, we're not saying a sentient or a general AI yet, but at a 155 estimated IQ, it's approaching Einstein levels, with Einstein being at least 160, as high as 190, but starting at 160. This puts it in a very intelligent realm, considering I think the smartest person on the planet is like 227, I believe, and 220s, I think. And then you have other people that kind of piggyback off of what Mo said to say that, hey, in another 10, 15 years, we're going to have 1,000 plus IQ systems. What are your thoughts on that? Regardless of the IQ debate, maybe let's talk about this. If a system is ingesting all the data, the digital data that's in the world today, right? Like, for example, it takes all the cancer research, it takes all the statistical data, all the Wikipedia data, and everything that's out on the internet and the dark web, and just assimilates all this data, and then eventually gets to a level of what people would consider general AI systems. Do you believe that these systems, because we're talking, maybe 5, 8, 10 years, it's hard to put estimates on years. Everybody wants to say 3 to 5, 5 to 8, or 5 to 10 to play it safe. But definitely within the next decade, as we see this steeply progress. Now that we have the quantum, I think we're seeing the beginning of what I would labeling the quantum chip wars. They're not really a war right now, but I think they're press releasing to kind of build up the hype and maybe to get more stakeholder confidence into their research and development. But we had Google AI Willow come out end of last year. Recently, Microsoft came out with theirs and their approach to error correction, and then everybody's waiting now for IBM to make their announcement. And I think NVIDIA just dropped another AI chipset announcement. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list of articles to read. So there's already another
Amazon
announcement
just had one.
from NVIDIA. So with all these chip advancements and everything that's catering to AI as well as these quantum chips and the error correction, I have a concern, and this is one of the things that is in one of my presentations I did with quantum threats, is that imagine you have 1,000 plus IQ AI that's approaching general AI, and then you get a quantum supercomputer of, let's say, 500 to a million qubits and with 99 point something error correction. And a country or nation state that has, let's say, 300 plus supercomputers in their nation that's functioning essentially as a supercomputer botnet, if you will, or grid computing network, if you will, at that point. What do you think that that has the potential to do from a hacking perspective? You know, when you have quantum supercomputer orchestrating routines, leveraging a 300 supercomputer network, uh, with an AI I'm sorry, the AI is orchestrating through the quantum computer with 1,000 plus IQ. All the knowledge in the world is disposable. What do you think that that looks like in 10 years?
I guess in short, I think that it's going to be very destabilizing. I think that we are rapidly hitting a point where we are accelerating in capabilities faster than we can build the appropriate safeguards around that. And I do think that at some point that's going to come to a head. And unfortunately, as the way that regulation goes in the world, it usually takes something bad before we start really applying regulation. And unfortunately, regulation may not even be the answer because there is, of course, that prisoner's dilemma argument of if we regulate and other more authoritarian or less free nations that have other agendas don't, then does that put us at a disadvantage and ultimately the world at a disadvantage? So I think that it's a very hard question, but I do think that we are, if quantum takes off, and I will say that quantum computing, at least as far as the fundamentals of how it works, is probably a bit above my pay grade. But my understanding is that the primary use cases, and I have started dabbling with like Qiskit and a few of the other
Thank you. Oh,
quantum
awesome site. Awesome.
and simulators and stuff like that, because it's a heck of a lot cheaper to build code on the quantum simulators than on the actual quantum computers that are hosted in the cloud. But it seems like the primary use case is kind of doing parallel floating point operations. And so where that comes into play right now is stuff like, of course, the traditional GPU processing, but stuff like password cracking, and of course, artificial intelligence is built on that same technology. And so I think while it only has a limited number of potential real world use cases, I do think that artificial intelligence is one of those core ones, and we're already seeing it take off fast. I think that quantum computing could become the accelerant to that fire that absolutely makes it take
Yeah.
off like a rocket. And
And I
I
just want
think that
to, yeah. I just want to add a quick caveat. You know, a lot of folks are going to read these headlines and they're going to see a bulleted point that, you know, it was able to do this, an algorithm that takes a supercomputer 6 septillion years and it did it in 5 minutes. I want to kind of caveat that. It's very important when you're reading those little bullets. It's sensational. You want to think, wow, it does it faster than a supercomputer at this speed. And when it comes to encryption, there's a whole other argument about encryption. So I always want to caveat this because people be like, well, that means everything's going to be readable and it's going to destroy the world. Not immediately, because generally speaking, I'm sorry I have to say this, Hutch, because it's just inform people because when I start talking about it. But in encryption systems, you have a thing called entropy, which is another word for randomness, and it usually has to do with the size of the key size of the pool. And then you have time, right? When we think of brute force, how many possible combinations in the entropy randomness does it have to do to eventually crack something? the real simplified rule is if you could tear down half the key space in a reasonable amount of time, it makes it akin to a coin flip from a crypto analyst perspective. Let me give it that way. It's a very simplified view I'm giving you folks, but that's generally the rule of thumb. The two things that work in favor of encryption standard to withstand a attack is entropy randomness slash time. And so when you hear these things about it doing something that takes so many septillion billion years and it does it in 5 minutes, it's solving a time for that particular algorithm running against the context of its the iterative process. So there is another mathematical component. If someone wants to go down the rabbit hole, why certain like symmetric, the AS256 is probably the bread and butter, the most used symmetric encryption standard in the world. And of course, we have a new group of lattice-based models like Kyber crystals, and they just came out with a plan B for Kyber if side channel ends up being an issue. It's funny, that's another discussion. But long story short, there are new encryption standards that NIST has released called post-quantum cryptography. They are not quantum proof because we don't have a quantum supercomputer to test it against. So in theory, these things should hold up pretty well. Like I said, we'll see, right? The next few years, we'll see. But if you are on an ECC and you're not moving to something like ECDSA, which is what the blockchain is on, or something else that's more robust and secure, then yeah, you definitely need to move to that. I don't want to go down the cryptography rabbit hole. Sorry about that, Hutch. I want to get back to talk about the hacking systems. But before we get back to hacking systems, there's a question that I want to ask because when you talk about going from the Air Force and into the commercial world, and you've been on stages, you've been in workshops, you've got a lot of exposure to different facets of the industry. In your career journey, I'm sure there's been like leaders, managers, maybe colleagues, or just level 99 rock stars in industry that you're like, I like this person. I want to be like them one day when you got started out, or people you admired, people that might have mentored you along your journey. And so the question mainly is there anybody you would like to shine a light on their name as being, hey, this person had a big impact in my career or a big influence on me?
I would say that the people that I find the most fascinating in the industry are the ones that have significant foresight, that are able to identify what's coming down well before it happens. I think a few names that come to mind. Of course, I think the well-known ones. So Ray Kurzweil is definitely one. Mo Gadot is another one that I
Yeah.
think has unbelievable foresight, and you already mentioned him. Yeah, for anybody that hasn't read it, Scary Smart was well before the
Yes.
release or broad release of the large language models and talked about kind of the emerging risks of artificial intelligence. Win Schwartu is another really interesting one who predicted a lot of the cyber warfare type events well before and kind of testimonies to Congress well before any of that even took place. So those are the ones that kind of stick out as kind of my heroes, the people that I think are can see the trend line moving and can understand the future before it gets here.
What a great list of names, by the way. Wonderful list of names. It makes me think of the Isaac Newton statement. If I've seen further, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And those names you've given are definitely titans and giants in industry. Um, this is a moment of the podcast where I kind of like to take a pause from the technical discussions, and we've been, talking a lot of tech and quantum AI hacking, but this is just for levity. Just kind of have a breather, have a little bit of fun. So what these are short, rapid fire questions. There's no right or wrong answer, so I don't want you to get all nervous. And just whatever first answer comes ahead, and then we'll just kind of keep it moving. So if you humor me, I'll fire some questions your way. All right. First one, cake or pie?
Pie,
What kind of pie?
cherry,
Hot or cold?
hot,
Hot. Okay, so this one's going to split the room. Star Wars or Star Trek?
definitely Star Wars.
Star Wars. Okay, who's your favorite character in Star Wars?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I'll go with Han Solo.
Han Solo. Okay, cool. Uh, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What has been your most favorite book of all time that you've read, and what is the most recent book you've read?
Uh, Favorite book would be Kim Zetter's Countdown to Zero Day, the account of Stuxnet.
Beautiful
Most
book.
recent book, yeah, fantastic book. And just so well written.
Oh, yes.
The most recent book that I read was The End of the World is Just the Beginning, which isn't a technology book as much as it is a geopolitics and looking at kind of the end of globalization and some of the impacts of that.
Okay. If you could definitely give me the links to those, they'll be in the description below, so folks don't have to pause and Google it. It's right down below. Wow, I know we could talk for a long time, but I definitely want to respect the time that you have. Um, a lot of us with our busy day jobs, and of course, you speak, you got the book, you got the podcast, you got a lot of different things going on. But I find a lot of us, cyber professionals, we make the time for causes and volunteer and charity, nonprofit work that may be near and dear to our heart. Or something that we're personally passionate about. So, is there any, and this is a question just to kind of shine a light on a nonprofit, charity, volunteer, or some kind of thing that is near and dear to you, whether you give of your time, money, or your energy to it, that you want to shine a light on that's doing good work in the world?
Yeah, I'd highlight Cyber Patriot, which is a program involved partly with the Air Force Association, but it touches a lot of different high school level kids and basically gives them the fundamental skills to uh, understand cyber defense at a very early age. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in the cybersecurity industry is creating a good pipeline that allows young talent to actually effectively move into the industry. And I think that that is a fantastic program. I've worked as a mentor with a number of different
Love it.
teams and schools. And it's always been a blast to see just the level of passion, the level of interest that comes from some of those kids. So, Cyber Patriot.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Another thing I like to do for all my guests is I like to give my guests kind of the last word. Whatever statements you want to make, things that are passionate to you, what's in your radar for the rest of the year. If there are events we could find you at, and of course, all your socials. Definitely send me all your social links you want to share, like LinkedIn or any other socials. They'll be in the description below. But I'd like to give you the last word.
Uh, yeah, I'd say probably the area that I'm digging into a whole lot lately is those autonomous hacking systems and leveraging large language models uh, for basically driving actual attack campaigns and executing at the command line interface. I think that it's fascinating how much heavy lifting the systems can already do, and it is. Uh, I think it is going to completely change the game on the attacking side. I think it also speaks to, and I'm doing a number of talks coming up about what I call agent versus agent. And it's this
Hmm.
idea that we have kind of the attack agents, but we also are increasingly seeing agentic solutions in SOC operations where you've got systems that are doing end-to-end investigations and response and remediation. And I think we are going to enter this strange phase in the near future where you've got attack agents that are trying to get in and are being responded to by defense agents. And that, of course, is going to happen at such rapid rates that it is going to be hard for us as humans to even keep track of what's happening in terms of cyber attack and defense. And so I do think that it's a strange time. It's an exciting time. I think that it's a time where there is a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunity. So where you can find me, HUSECCon is one of my favorite conferences here locally for me in Houston. So I would say one of the best conferences out there. So even if you aren't local to Houston, I'd say it's worth traveling for. Fantastic conference. And of course, I'm always out there at Black Hat and DEF CON. And a few of the other small conferences I haven't really set the agenda for this year, but
Okay. Well, Hutch, thank you so much for giving of your time. Again, I know you're super busy, but again, congratulations on the book. And I love that you're still, having an impact across industry, attending these conferences. I definitely got to check out, and folks, check out the link to his podcast below with him and Lynn. Again, hearing about Lynn, I think I've actually got an invite out to Lynn to be on my podcast. So hopefully, down the road, I can get him on. But hearing about him trying to do that transfusion of human to technology, I think that's right up what Neuralink's doing, and like the fact that he's already doing it, right? That's just amazing. And again, the work that you do, and then sharing your story going from the uniform to cyber. Thank you for making that choice. We need a million more like you. So, Hutch, thank you for being on Top Cyber Pro podcast.
thanks, Jim. This was awesome. Appreciate it.